This is Gov Fayemi watching Noire TV.
This is Engineer Abdullahi Sule, Governor of Nasarawa, watching NoireTV.
I am Utomi, you're watching NoireTV.
This is Global Politics Horizon. Today we have three special guests. We have the Governor of Nasarawa State, Governor Sule here. We also have Dr. Fayemi, who was the former governor of Ekiti State and was a former minister of mineral resources. And of course, so we have Professor Utomi, who's a lot of you guys already know. So we're gonna have a very interactive session. It's gonna be fun and exciting.
Thank you so much. And I'm Chamaduru for NoireTV. And we're gonna start off with a relatively easy question, which is basically, how would you guys define fiscal responsibility as it regards state governance?
So I think it's appropriate to start with a one-time Director General who was chairman of a governors forum to give us a perspective on how the governors defined it. Then a serving governor, then we onlookers will kick in.
It's okay.
Okay. Well, as a retiree who has been in this space, well, I think fiscal responsibility means exactly what it says: putting the people's resources to the best use possible in an accountable and transparent manner.
Yeah.
How to generate the resources, how to manage the resources, how to expend the resources, and how to account for the resources.
Is there anything you would add to that definition?
Yeah, actually, in addition to that, how to also ensure that we have the regulatory agencies that also have some checks and balances. In our own case, to ensure the transparency and accountability. Most of the other expenses we have, especially if they are capital in nature, they have to go through an agency called the Bureau of Public Procurement, which is a state agency, that has to go through word by word any aspect of spending to ensure that is it in the contract, has it been provided in the budget, all this is properly in the budget that is supposed to be there. Are we spending more than what we are supposed to spend? Are we getting value for money? Have we selected the right contractor, who is supposed to do this? So all these are responsibilities that are usually carried out, by the independent agency called the Bureau of Public Procurement. So that's the only addition that I will have.
Okay.
Well, if you want me to add, I would like to say that the matter of fiscal responsibility cuts across a number of, if you will, arena. First arena is a governance arena, in that, there should be due process for all activity of government because it belongs to the public domain. It's not a private thing. It belongs to the people, so the people have a duty, or have a right to know how their resources are expended. So you have the due processes that Governor Sule talked about. Some of those public procurement acts have been put in place to facilitate. And it's also a moral dimension. And this moral dimension deals with, first of all, the fact that values shape human progress. People trust more when they see that certain values are lived. But very importantly, it shapes the kinds of choices you make. We're in Washington here. Many years ago, Lyndon Baines Johnson was president here in Washington, and I think it was Transport Secretary was making some remark about his chauffeur, and Johnson said, "Chauffeur, Transport Secretary, if you have a chauffeur, how do you know what's wrong with public transport? You should not be traveling in a car. You should be traveling by public transport." And that was it for that, secretary. He began to travel by the metro, which makes sense. It's a moral thing, not because he can't afford it. Of course, depending on general ideology, it can go too far. I still remember here in Washington years ago when public officials were accused of using public resources for private, and I think it was Reagan who went to play golf with a helicopter. It was hard for him,
Right.
you know. But then it got so far. I remember one secretary, I believe, was going to some event outside of Washington. He was traveling with his wife, but his wife a ticket. His wife went. They came back, and he was so the car from the government that came to pick him from the airport. He said no, his wife should take a cab, and they were all both going to his home. So sometimes you can get to almost ridiculous levels.
Yeah.
But the thing is that we should have a certain sensitivity to a public resource and use them. For example, you can be a multi-millionaire and work for the government. But if you're doing government business, you fly economy, because that's the way the government, when you're going on, you can get on economy, get there, get on your private jet and go to do something else.
Right.
It's just a certain sensitivity about what belongs in the public domain and how to
Right.
deal with that.
And so, building on that, as you're making these decisions, how do you prioritize spending? You know, I'm sure you have many competing interests. How do you prioritize spending, and does that answer change in times of economic uncertainty?
Well, that's clearly the primary responsibility of any leader. If you're an elected official,
Right. So in practice,
prioritizing
yes,
expenditure is a primary task you have. And how do you do that?
yes,
First is the nature of your environment, the people that you're governing. What are their desires? What are their expectations?
and how are you getting the feedback?
That you get primarily through your political engagement.
Okay,
That's the first level of it. Because if you're going to run for office in a democratic environment,
yeah,
you've got to listen to people
yes,
about their yearnings,
Right.
about their expectations. If it is education that is a primary responsibility to them,
Yeah.
or healthcare, or social security, or security,
yeah,
you see that hierarchy of needs. And on the basis of that, you also look at the resources available to you and how to generate additional resources or look for alternative sources of funding, private sector, multilateral support, development finance, and the totality of it is what you put in place to respond to the yearnings that have been placed before you.
okay, yeah,
And how you then prioritize that depends primarily on what you also as a leader feels is the burden your people carry. Because it's not all the time that what the people tell you is what is best for them. You also have a responsibility as a leader to say, yes, it's okay for you to look at that in terms of your existential needs,
yeah,
immediate. But over the long term, this is what you're going to praise me for. This is what this society really needs in order to get to a developmental state, which may not be popular in the immediate. I mean, let me give you an analogy. The sage Obafemi Awolowo in 1952-53 in Nigeria, when he was going to introduce the free education program, it was unpopular because people didn't want to withdraw their kids from the farm to start going to school. They didn't understand it in the manner he described it. So when he then levied each adult equivalent of £1 at the time in order to fund the free education program, he almost lost the regional elections. Today, if you speak to the average person from the western part of the country, what they praise Awolowo most for was the opportunity of education that he provided for them.
And so with that example, what would you say is the modern day equivalent right now of that example, or during your time as governor? What would you say is the equivalent of that example where, you know, it was unpopular to send your children to school from farming, but they now saw it was a good decision? Is there a parallel during your governance?
Oh, education would always be the parallel.
Okay.
When I started what is known now in Ekiti as the knowledge zone,
Okay.
the Ekiti knowledge zone, which is
For those who don't know,
a technical hub
Okay.
for information technology.
Okay.
People didn't understand why that. And for me, Ekiti is already known as a knowledge place in Nigeria. If you talk to the average Nigerian, they'll say, "Oh, it's that place where they produce professors and all that."
Okay.
But the reality is that producing professors is not necessarily a correlate to wealth creation. So we were looking for something that could accelerate wealth creation and human development beyond just providing education.
Yeah.
And we
sense.
felt that what would accelerate that was to move very fast to the technology world, and
Definitely.
build a space, a hub for younger people to embrace technology. So I started a whole range of programs, a laptop per child in secondary schools, and also the Knowledge City, which is linked to other infrastructural development initiatives. In the short term, people didn't understand it and they didn't like it.
Yeah.
They wanted stomach infrastructure in the local parlance. But that's why I say a leader must also take the people where they don't necessarily want to go.
Yes.
But they need to go because that's really ultimately what's best for them.
Okay, fantastic. I didn't even know about those things, so that's an amazing answer. And Governor Sule, what would you say? How do you make your decision on how you're going to prioritize spending? How are you getting the feedback from the people and incorporating that into your decision making?
Well, for us, there are several ways you can do that. Similar to what Governor Fayemi mentioned, is that you have constant interaction with the people. You have also other people who are the local government chairmen, who are the councillors, who are your commissioners, who are political aides, who are constantly getting in touch with the people and bringing back information. But as a governor, I also had my own ways. I constantly, was in touch with the people. I was getting in touch with some of the traditional rulers who were having constant meetings and things like that. Now, which ones are the direct ways, for instance, that are outside this? We may be sitting there, not planned, nothing. Then there is insecurity situation in one place. It's a place where we have to make an investment.
Yeah.
So we find out why is there so much insecurity. And I had like 3 locations where I had that kind of instances. We were having insecurity because they had a very bad road. So the security officials were finding it very difficult, to be able to follow these criminals. So the criminals took advantage of the bad situation. So first we had to construct a road in that place. Secondly, because they didn't have sufficient security agencies in that area, security officials and the rest of that, quickly we had to do something like these are practical ones that you can see quickly. What do you do? So I'm coming back with the example that he mentioned, which is correct, that you can actually take a decision that may be very, very unpopular because the people are not thinking about that. And a good example is this. We are looking at an area where we have to make an investment for the future. And other people may say, no, you have to increase the salaries of workers. That is what we are looking forward to. But you are saying that, well, this is amount of money we have. Instead of saying we are going to increase, workers constitute less than 5% of the total population in the state. So if you take all the money to give to workers, 95% of the people are not benefiting anything. So you can say, no, I'm going to now invest the money where 100% of the people, including the workers, are going to benefit from it. So sometimes, and sometimes, some of the educated people are the ones on the social media. Maybe the workers are the ones who are constantly, getting in touch with the media, who are making the noise. The 95% may just be silent. They may not have any contact with the media or something like that. So those are the kinds of situations that you will have.
Do you want to add?
Well, no, I think that they've said what needs to be said. The important thing is that we need systems for being in touch with the people. You can have, as a philosophy of governing, regular town hall meetings where you reach the grassroots, you bring civil society together and listen to the people. What are their priorities? There have been approaches to governance that have said, look, in our budgeting, we're going to reserve a certain percentage for initiatives that the community themselves identify and say, this is our priority. And so every year, okay, Ekiti local government, there's this pot of money available to you. You decide what is your top priority in that local government and utilize that for this purpose. That can be one way of getting that kind of input to ensure that you work. But overall, I think the essence of leadership is to be able to vision the future, identify what's in that future that is in the greater interest of everybody, and find a way of communicating to the people the fact that this is in their best interest. Usually they will understand and come with you, but sometimes their capacity to see that future may not be there. I mean, classic American example is Abraham Lincoln. And, how he saw the future of America, without slavery and the visions of his time, who went to civil war for it. America came out better for it. This is why till today, more books on transforming leadership are being written about Lincoln 150 years since he has died, because that capacity to have seen the good of all. And why did people agree to follow him to it? And this is the very important thing when you discuss leadership. People followed him because they saw his life of sacrifice for the people. And they decided, well, okay, we may not understand what he's talking about, but there's a track record of his giving of himself for our good. Let's try what he's saying. In the end, everybody comes out and says, hey, this is good for us.
Well, I like that example you provided, but it seems like, of course, we know there were recent protests in Nigeria. It seems like one of the main complaints that the protesters felt was that they were the ones doing all the sacrifice, right? So where's the gap between how governance should be working, how we all kind of agree on this definition and how it should be executed, and what the people are feeling?
Well, over the years, you may be right that a certain deficit of trust has developed between the governed
or why?
and the governors.
Okay.
And I'm using governors generically,
Okay.
president, ministers,
Yes.
across the board. And that's informed by basically the feeling that we're not being listened to.
So is it that
government knows best, or there's a perception that government presents the impression that it knows what's good for you as a people, and just stay in your lane.
Yeah.
We take care of you.
Right.
The mommy state.
Yeah.
But you also now have the upsurge in technology, particularly the social media,
Right.
where people have become citizen leaders. If you have 3 million people in a particular state, say Nasarawa or Ekiti, you almost have 3 million opinions of how to govern that state. Everybody believes that I have a solution. So your duty as a leader, and of course you have to earn that trust, just as the Lincoln example that Prof gave. Your duty as a leader is to aggregate the totality of those opinions and come up with something that appeals to everybody somewhat, which is a very difficult situation because resources are limited, your time is finite, the electoral cycle is short. And for many decisions, there are longer lasting decisions beyond the 4-year span of your time in office.
Right.
So the electoral cycle is not necessarily aligned with the project or programmatic cycle.
Right. Yeah.
So in order for you to be able to accomplish some of those enduring legacies, you probably need more than just those 4 years.
Right.
And you need to earn enough trust. So you need to then sequence. How do I pluck the low-hanging fruits in order to gain the trust of the populace, so that I can then do the more longer-lasting things that are necessary for me to do? It's always a perennial challenge of every leader. And we see that in Nigeria. So part of the problem that we also see is the disconnect between policy formulation, policy advocacy, and policy implementation. Execution has been challenged in Nigeria, even when there is a growing consensus on a particular policy. Fuel subsidy removal, for example. There's hardly anybody in the policy arena. We as governors, we advocated for it. Most private sector specialists like Prof advocated for it. The government eventually did it, but did the government do it in the manner that will make that policy achieve purpose? So sometimes in politics, you can do the right thing wrongly.
So with this fuel subsidy example, what would you have changed in the execution if it were up to you?
What would I have changed?
Yes.
Well, it's not so much what I would have changed. As I said, in principle, there's very little to disagree with. Nigeria had reached a breaking point, and everybody felt, in terms of benefit, we were losing more than gaining more. But because it had become an albatross around the neck of everybody, in which we felt we could not do without it, we needed to have made sufficient provision for the most vulnerable segment of our population before announcing it.
Okay.
That's
yeah.
the only thing I would have done differently.
I think
And that's what the governors actually proposed.
Okay.
Yeah, that's part of it, a very important part of it. But the other part of it, and I've really been on this for more than 30 years, is that the NNPC is an opaque organization, and a great deal of what we call subsidy is actually stealing within that structure. Look, in 1994, 95, I don't remember, yeah, I was working on a book, Managing Uncertainty. And I went to interview the then immediate past group managing director of NNPC, Dr. Tom John. And I said to him, wouldn't it help if we privatize a portion of NNPC, or privatize NNPC, put that on the London Stock Exchange and this, and I talked about the dimensions of the value that it will create for Nigeria. And he kind of like went, what do you mean privatizing NNPC? Is it not privatized? I said, oh, I think I missed it. When did it happen? Then he laughed. He said, well, I think NNPC has always been privatized. The problem is that those who own it did not pay for it. Yeah, chew that over. I chewed it over for 30 seconds before I got, oh my God, this is brilliant. The truth of the matter is that the NNPC has not always been governed well. And the opacity of NNPC has allowed for us to run this scheme where over the years, what we call subsidy, it's full of all kinds of games. At the point a couple of people got jailed, and this, a petrol tanker is imported, it comes in, it goes out, it comes back in, they meter it, they pay the people. Stuff like that was routine. Even above and beyond those kinds of games, if you look at the numbers, they don't add up, they don't make sense. Give an example. California is one of the most motorized societies in the world. People, everybody has a car. If you look at person per liter consumption of petrol in California, it's less than Nigeria, where the few people have cars. It tells you there's something wrong with this. It doesn't make sense.
Right.
One time I did a comparison. Pakistan, California, several places. So it shows that if you dealt with that opacity and created systems of accountability, you would have reduced maybe 60% of what you call subsidy. You don't throw the burden on the poor people. And then you can take it from there.
I'm just going to go in and just throw a question at Governor Sule. I wanted to know, how do you engage with local governments in terms of budgetary decisions? What's your process and when you work with local governments within your states? And after that, Dr. Fayemi as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think Governor Kayode Fayemi has addressed part of that when he says he's talking of governance. He is not just referring to the presidency, he's talking of the regional governors, local government, and the rest of that. Now, as far as involving them in the budget that you have mentioned, there are two categories of involvement. One is we do have what we call Ministry of Local Government. Every state has one. So there is a budget provision for that as a local government. However, every local government actually develops its own, because they have a complete system as a local government. They do have the legislator, those are the councillors. They have a speaker in there. They also present their budget to them, and they will go through the process of, just like the governor presents his budget to the assembly, the local government chairman presents his budget also to the councillors, and they go through that. And that happens without any interference from the state. So what they do, just like the states do, is to go and check what is their possible income in a year and how do they expect to spend that income. And that's the way they present it. How do they want to borrow maybe some money if they have to borrow some money? So they present it, and then that is how actually the budget goes through, and that's how they approve the budget, and that's how it comes to them. And I think the people will begin to see the realities of that now that they have their autonomy. So now that they have their autonomy, so all the monies that they have budgeted to say, this is what we have budgeted, this is what is coming to us, this is how we are going to spend it, now they are going to get that money direct. And it is going to not be through the state, through the joint account. So the State Ministry of Local Government will have no interference whatsoever with how much money they do. But all the aspect of spending remain the same. Okay. They are going to do their salaries here. They are going to pay 5% for the what do you call it? The traditional rulers. They are going to pay for their security. They are going to do that. So all the heads are still there. That has not changed. The only thing that has changed is that the local government is going to get its money directly. And there is a danger also in that, really, right now. Some local government areas earn more than what they need to spend. Some earn less. So where they are getting the money in a joint account, they are able to do what they call brother's keeper. So that means this one takes a little bit out of what they don't need, they add to this one, and that's how each one of them is able to sustain its own operations. But where now everybody is getting that, so some local government areas will end up, having some savings, and some other local government areas will continue to get deficit. So they will not be able to meet up with that. But you will never be able to see that until the real autonomy actually kicks off.
So a follow-up question to Dr. Fayemi. The president had initially, President Tinubu has stated that the state governors are leaving the local governments out, that they need to reach out in terms of being able to make sure resources get to them. What do you think needs to be done up? I know this is what policy is right now. Why do you think the president made that statement? Is it not far-reaching enough, or are there things that need to be done? Coming from experience, I know you're not in government, but you must have seen several cycles.
Well, I'm glad you said that. I'm not in government, so I can't really peer into the mind of the president to know why he said what he said. But I can say that as a former chair of the Governors Forum, this is a perennial challenge, and there's always been the view that governors are overbearing, states don't provide the necessary freedom or autonomy for local government to undertake expenditure. I think in a lot of cases it's a misunderstanding or a misreading of what actually transpires. Yes, sometimes states take responsibility on behalf of local governments, and that's informed by history. When local governments used to operate under the military, for example, that was when we experienced a significant backlog of salaries being unpaid, particularly for primary school teachers, primary health workers, and local government workers. And what tends to happen through this joint account that Governor Sule just spoke about was the ability of the state to superintend a process in which what is called first line charge, those things relating to salaries and emoluments of pensioners, of health workers, of primary school teachers, those things that are really critical to the populace, get sorted out first. And the state supervises that. And then leaves the local government with the rest of the fund to attend to things that they now consider maybe secondary priority items. But naturally, things don't necessarily go the same way in all of the states. There may have been states with infraction, but the fundamental point to make is that in a two-tier federal system, which is really what we are, local governments are like counties in the United States. Okay. They are subsumed within the framework of states. not extensions of Washington DC. And you don't want a situation in which states that are closest to the local authorities don't have that supervisory authority, and it is the federal government that has now undertaken that role. We don't know yet how this autonomy initiative will play out, but it's fraught with potential dangers. And I think, having realized that, the federal government and the states have placed I believe a 90-day moratorium to work out the mechanics of this,
Okay.
in order to ensure that it is seamless. It remains to be seen how that is going to eventually pan out. But what's important is accountability, transparency of resources available to states and local authorities, as well as to the federal government, and each tier of government taking its responsibility to its citizens seriously.
Fantastic. Governor Sule, I wanted to talk about you have a lithium factory that's currently running. That's I believe is a public-private partnership between the state and a foreign company. Can you speak to how that's going? What are your experiences with that, and how the resources being allocated to people within your state, and what you foresee for the future regarding this partnership, and maybe takeaways that states could take? And also, Dr. Fayemi, I know you were a Minister of Mineral Resources as well, so this kind of ties into that as well, being that is something it's a mineral that's the federal government. It comes under the furrow of the federal government as well. How do both of you would manage that situation, being that it's a state that's generating the resources, and obviously there's the federal government side as well? So I'll start with you, Governor Sule.
All right, thank you very much. And I think let me make some clarification there. The one you are referring to on the lithium factory, that is, most people are referring to the one that is 4,000 metric tons capacity refining a day, which is a little over 1 million a year. So that is the one most people, when they tell me about lithium, they are referring to that because it's the one well publicized that Mr. President sent the Senate President to come and commission on his behalf, and it went high because a lot of big players, like Canmax from China and the rest of that all came to Nigeria, just because of that. Because that's the first time they are seeing something as big as that, and a lot of them were surprised. I remember what one of the biggest Chinese players told me. He said when he heard about it, he didn't believe it until he came to see it by himself. So, and that is about $200 million investment. So that's not a PPP, that one. The one that is, so that one is actually built by another investor called Avatar. So Avatar built it 100%, from ground zero. Nasarawa State has no interest in that one. The one that Nasarawa State has interest is the one called Gafen. That one is where you have a 3.5 CU area, and then Nasarawa State has 1.5, two other companies has 1 CU each. So our 1.5 CU, we went into an agreement with one of the companies that is having 1 CU called Gafen. And the reason why we went with that one rather than the other one is because they have agreed that they will also build a factory in that location. And then the factory is going to now derive into the full value chain. So they will do their employment there, they will train our people, and the people will work, they earn their living, they earn the knowledge of how to run these factories, and then the construction is going to be there, will create development in the area. And the most important part of it, apart from the corporate social responsibility that will be provided, they are going to do the reclamation of the area, of the land. So that is the one that is PPP. So Nasarawa State already received some signature bonus, and Nasarawa State will receive income every month. Every year. Well, they gave every month option, but we took every year. So every year at the end of the year, we're going to get certain amount of money. So that's the one that is PPP. And there are several also like that, about 4 or 5 other companies for either lithium or tin mining and tin things like that, which is the reason why I'm here in Washington, D.C. anyway. I'm here in order to discuss some of those opportunities, because Nasarawa is called the state of solid minerals, and that's what we are known for. So we have a lot of these minerals, including precious metals, such as nickel, cobalt, titanium, Monel, and the rest of that. We have them in Nasarawa State, and we have smaller other companies, the artisan miners, that are doing a little bit of lead, tin. And today we also have another company that has established its own granite, factory. So most of the marble that you see in the market today in Abuja is being produced in Nasarawa State, from that company that has also entered into that. So those are the kinds of things that even brought me to Washington.
That is fantastic.
In the first place, yes.
Maybe towards the end, you can also, obviously let people, investors, because you're into 8 million homes, let them know how they can reach out to your state. Investors here that would like to, talk to you about possible investments and coming to the state.
That's what
But I want to hear from Dr. Fayemi as well, having run up on that ministry.
I think what you've had is fantastic, and it can only happen when you provide an enabling environment at the national level, because mining is exclusively in the federal side of the constitution. It's not a state-led initiative. Having said that, however, one of the very important things we did while I was in charge of mineral resources was to create an environment in which partnership and collaboration thrives between states, private sector players, and the federal government. Yes, we issue all the licenses as federal government for whatever you want to mine in Nigeria. But the land belongs to the governor in the state. You can't access your mineral resources unless you go through the land, which is not in our exclusive preserve. So you need to work out a collaborative framework that enables states to become more enthusiastic and not just see you as an overlord coming to dictate what will happen at the local level. But you also need to incorporate communities where these resources reside.
Fantastic.
In order to ensure that they're also not left out of the.
So why has Governor Sule, he has succeeded where many others have failed?
Well,
Increasingly,
many have succeeded. Many states have succeeded. It's just that Governor Sule, as he described it, he's the governor of the solid mineral state. So he probably has more resources. But what is important?
So it's more about the quantity.
It's not just more about quantity. It's more about knowledge. One of the things that the federal government did while I was minister was to ensure that data is available. So we commissioned an aeromagnetic survey of the entire country to get a sense of, everybody talks glibly, Nigeria is rich in solid minerals. But when you really drill down and say, okay, what exactly is it? Quantity, quality, commercial viability, you need to know all of that in order to determine whether something is really there or not. And the only way you can do that, the only body empowered to do that, is the geological surveys in Nigeria. So we commissioned, when I was minister, with support from the World Bank, an entire survey of the country, which Nasarawa can now access, or a private sector player interested from Nasarawa can now come to us at Geological Survey and say, look, I'm interested in mining. Which area should I go? And as far as lithium is concerned, I know when we did the survey, I think about 4 states. Nasarawa is tops in that. I think Oyo, I think Kwara, and one other, maybe Ekiti, a little bit. So we can tell you, just from looking at the records, in geological survey, and it's the same in the United States. If you go to geological survey here, they will give you information. So information is the number one thing you need.
Correct.
Once you get information, you can access funding, because the private sector players can now be a lot more enthusiastic that, okay, they have this there, which is what oil used to have much better than mineral resources, because they would do seismic surveys. I think that's what they call it in oil and gas.
Yes.
They do seismic survey, and they can tell you that there are 40 million barrels of reserve in this particular oil block. So we need to ensure that that's what happens in the mining sector as well. And that's a responsibility for government largely. But private sector players can also be part of it. But when you've done that, you also have to create incentives for states. And what we did was to extend the 13% derivation that is available to oil and gas states to the solid minerals states. So Governor Sule can benefit 13% from that lithium that you just talked about.
Mhm.
Fantastic.
That obtains in Nigeria now, which happened when I was minister, and it's continued since then.
Correct. It's going on.
Is going. So you can get that. And that's an incentive for the state. But beyond that incentive is to also now, we established a national council on mining and mineral resources development, which brings together annually all of the 36 states, the federal government, research institutions, private sector players, to really look at what's happening in the mining space and what to do in order to improve on extant provisions, either on the regulation or the law or security. More often than not, security is a big deal in mining, or environmental degradation. These are issues that come up constantly that must form part of that collaboration between the federal, the state, and the communities, so that everybody feels a sense of ownership rather than a sense of overlordship, which used to be the case.
Fantastic. Prof, do you have anything to chime in, obviously, from the private sector side, or what you've seen over the past many years compared to past? Have you seen any improvements? Have you seen any limitations? What have you seen currently that's being done right? Nasarawa being obviously a positive light within the Nigerian space, and obviously there are states that are not performing, carrying their weight. Can you speak to that as well?
Well, things are progressing in a certain direction, but we need to get a little bit to the root of some of the problems with local governments, state governments, and the federal government, and move it to that domain. In the First Republic, we only thought about two levels of government: national, subnational. Indeed and in truth, as a true federal structure, the subnationals were responsible for accessing. In fact, when oil came, the government of Eastern Region was the one that dealt with Shell and all of that. And a portion of the revenues, I believe it was 50%, was then transferred by the subnational to the national. But military rule damaged our federal system. Fiscal transfers were literally ganacheed by power, by the military, centripetal forces and centrifugal forces pushing in different ways. We had this center that suctioned everywhere. At a point in time, and funny enough, I was speaking with Dr. Kalu Kakalo a couple of days ago from Geneva, and we were kind of like joking about it. But when the so-called structural adjustment program was being introduced, we had reached a point where actually the federal government was getting like 99% of the revenues. I mean, what was going to the states by fiscal transfers at that time, oil producing states were getting less than 1%. Because even if they call it a certain percentage, by the time you remove the so-called famous 4 A's, Abeokuta, Ajaokuta, all those Alaja, whatever it is, special projects, what actually really got to the subnational was less than 1% oil producing state. But we have traveled some distance. In that regard, we had this long, unfortunately long, PPIB conversation. Then now we have some Petroleum Industry Act, but still problematic. But critical to this conversation, you have to go back to the Obasanjo government around 75, 76, engaged in local government reforms. Then they took some ideas from Eastern Europe somewhere, and I think from Brazil, and made the third tier of government actually a participant in fiscal transfers. And then local governments now got as much as 20.9% of federally collected revenues. Now, what he did was actually significantly, obtusely skew revenue from states. Now, the sad thing made it more complex was that quality of leadership at the third tier level was very, very poor. You know, I would not. Some governors sent their T-boys to go and be members of the local government and administration, and when the guys get there, they say, "Hey, this is what are we supposed to do?" Color guy, tell us what we're supposed to do. So anyway, we had those dysfunctional kinds of things, and it affected governance significantly. There was need to rethink it. And part of what we must begin to do is, look, I now more or less live in my village. People don't understand that, but I more or less live in my village now in Delta State in Nigeria. I passed through my Lagos house, and there are dozens, hundreds like me, better than me, former permanent secretaries, former retired generals. They're all going back to those places. With that stock of quality human capital, if we still keep sending our T-boys to, because something's wrong with all of us. So I think what we then need to do with higher quality, because it is the level of government closest to the people. That's where the choice is. If we have a development strategy where, for example, growth is powered by our factor endowments. So in this local government area, the endowment is sesame seed. They should be able to influence curriculum for primary schools. So by the time you are finishing primary 6, you know enough to increase the yield in production of sesame seeds by X factor. By the time you are through secondary school, you know the players and ways of the value chain of sesame seed, and you can become a successful businessman without even thinking of going to university or something like that. That's when local governments will be as effective and as useful as they should or could be. When 20 people like me sit in my village, my village is also like Ekiti, village of professors. I think we have 150 or so from that, my small town. And some governor comes there and says, if he looks at our face, he will take off. He will not do it, But that's really what needs to change. The capacity of those who engage. That is so important for how we change the economy and grow things.
Fantastic. I'm glad you just talked about that. Choma, you want to delve into the question?
Well, this is supposed to be a live interactive session. I know we have a packed waiting room, so I wanted to give someone a chance to ask a question.
I had my governor, I didn't hear anything.
We had him, but it's not clear again.
Okay, I think you can go ahead with your question.
I'm hearing you.
First, I want to appreciate the fact that God took Engineer Abdullahi Sule safely to the United States, precisely Washington, D.C. Your Excellency, you have done a lot in the development of Nasarawa State. I must applaud you for that. And in terms of industrialization, which had been your anchor point during your campaigns, that you will ensure industrialization of the state. It beats my imagination with the exploration of minerals in the states today, and where it has also unleashed insecurity in the state. I don't know if while out there you have collaboration with the United States government to ensure safety in Nasarawa State. Thank you very much, sir.
All right. Yeah, I don't know. He wants me to respond? Or?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So thank you very much, Francis. Sorry, the picture was not very clear, so I couldn't tell who is. I didn't know that this TV station goes all the way to Nasarawa State. So I'm glad to see that we are also on it. And thank you very much for participating. And you are right. Anytime I have mentioned it at most of our fora that we had today, that every time you have mining activity, you also have insecurity. So I mentioned it myself, that this is the reality of the town. And the reason is it brings economic advantage, and once there is something there that people know that especially the artisan farm miners, once they know that there is something to go in there, definitely they will get into it. But even before coming to Washington, D.C., we have been working right there in Nasarawa State, to ensure that we create the opportunities. I had mentioned earlier on in the show that we constructed some of the roads, which if you are from Nasarawa State, you will know. Even within areas in Lafayette where there are issues that have to do with security of mining, we are constructing roads in those areas. We are providing security people in the area. The same mining activity that we are talking about of Avatar of this lithium, it will not have happened at all if not that we constructed a road between Mararaba and Udegi area, in order to reduce the tension, and then the roads that we also constructed, between Farurua and Sisimbaki and the rest of that, because these are areas where there is a lot of activity, and then you will come across that. So with or without coming to Washington, D.C., we must continue to work on the security, and that is where we are doing it as far as that is concerned.
Please go ahead with your question.
First and foremost, I know time is very limited. I commend the leadership of Governor Sule and Governor Fayemi and Prof. I also would like to say this. I just came back from Nigeria and with investors that goes beyond Nigerian diaspora. The reality is this: we have to go beyond diaspora. As long as we identify diaspora as a missing factor in development, we need to identify diaspora as a stakeholder in the entire equation, which means if we don't, that premise is already destroyed. And I believe that the diaspora is underutilized. I really commend the quotations I've had today about Abraham Lincoln. One of the key things that is very common to me as the president of the U.S. Africa Chamber of Commerce and somebody who is so much invested in economic development in Africa, particularly Nigeria, where I'm from, is this. Most of the people that we are quoting, America, we are trying to copy, the UK, USA, whatever, leaders create legacy projects. I commend Dr. Sule, Dr. Fayemi for what he has done in strategic minerals when he was the minister, and what Governor Sule is doing currently, and I've interfaced with him, within the last couple of years, and the key thing is this: we must leverage the assets that we have. Those minerals are assets. Local government, state government, regional government, federal government are all assets. Where does the diaspora fit into this asset? Are we leveraging the asset, direct and collateral asset that the diaspora brings to the table? And that's my question, really. And I think it's underutilized, and we're not getting involved as we should be in nation building. I rest my case. Thank you so much.
Yeah, if I may actually speak to that subject, and it's one also very dear to my heart. If you look at the 20th century and the countries that surged forward in 20th century, all were driven by diaspora engagement, beginning with Japan post-Meiji Restoration. It was the Japanese diaspora, majorly in Germany, that got Japan to become more tech conscious and drove the ascendancy of Japan. India rising, China rising, all of those are anchored significantly on the diaspora. Even if you look at the role of academics from those countries, as one who has been in business school leadership, I remember I used to visit frequently Northwestern, the Kellogg School, when Deepak Jain. There was a time when many of the business schools in the US, their deans were Indians, and they used that to direct outsourcing to India. When Joe Stiglitz wrote Globalization and Its Discontents, there was a subtle reply from his colleague at the Earth Institute at Columbia, Jagdish Bhagwati, in defense of globalization. So you see, and after a while, why is Deepak Jain never around when anyone is around Evanston? I realized he was on the board of Reliance Industries. It was all those big Indian companies. So the same thing's got to happen for Africa to get the lift that it deserves. It's diaspora, including even U.S. foreign policy. I mean, I've challenged people, why does America act this way to Africa? one policymaker jokingly said to me, look, America does not think of anybody. It's just that the people who trouble them enough get attention. If 4 or 5 congressmen make Africa their case, things will change. And it's the diaspora who have to do that. So it's a very important point that he makes.
Well, I really want to thank you for that question, Dr. Madu. Incidentally, you're talking to 3 diasporans who went back home, who went back home, and you still have very strong connections to our existence out here. But the critical point that you've made, which we need to come to terms with, is to remove this them and us attitude. There is a sense in which our people outside also develop an imperious attitude towards what is going on at home. And there's a sense of resentment by people who are at home struggling to eke out a living, looking at people who are outside, instead of a collaborative approach that should say, okay, migration is a big deal in the world that we live in now. How do we structure engagement that is collective rather than individualistic? A nurse goes out on a single prospect for a job or in search of the golden fleece, rather than an organized approach. I was reading the news just yesterday. President Ruto signed an agreement with the Chancellor of Germany to bring in 250,000 workers. But that is structured. It's not if I knew just went in search of a job in Canada or in the United States or in the United Kingdom in which I'm being exploited. But my own government is responsible for this partnership. And in that partnership, you can also structure an engagement with, if you take a doctor from Nigeria to the United States, the United States government must also have a way of paying back, because that doctor you've taken out, it should be possible for you to say, okay, Nigeria is insisting you must give us support to train 2 doctors as a replacement for the 1 doctor that you've taken out. That way, it's not as if we are on a second slavery. We are on a structure, because you need our people who have been trained most times free of charge, free tuition. The equivalent of a medical doctor that has come from Nigeria to the United States, trained in the United States, is still paying back student loan 30 years after leaving college.
Sure.
But the Nigerian who has been trained almost for free from the public university in Nigeria, who has japped out here and started a job, is almost doing it for free without any payback. So we need a structured engagement, and when we do that, then we need to open up the space. Our diasporans need to be able to vote and be voted for in their communities if they are seen to be of benefit to their people at home. Because there are so many people who are out here who are really adding value in the various communities at home. We cannot exclude them from the process of governance if they so wish to be part of it. Those are the kind of things that I think NIDCOM, Nigerian Diaspora Commission, ought to be interested in. Even the basics. Where is the database of diasporans? Nigerians in various fields, out in the United States, in Japan, in China. Do we even know our people? Do we have the numbers? Let alone protect them if they run into trouble. Provide consular services for them. Those are the kind of issues that I believe we ought to be looking at now, because the world is changing and the demographic change is upon us. There are countries in the world that they no longer have young people. The median age in Nigeria is 18. The median age in China is 38. The median age in the United States is 38. In India is 28. We were 18. So we have an opportunity to make a fundamental difference, but only if we structure it, not allow our people to continue to be bill of lading and just being thrown back and forth in search of survival. I think that's where government needs to come in. And your point about diaspora is something that we need to reflect on carefully and structure it the way the Filipinos used to organize for their citizens to come out as nurses, as health workers, you name it,
seafarers,
and Bangladeshis, and even Indians, as Prof mentioned. We leave our people to their devices. We let them go wherever they want to go without any structured engagement with those who are taking them.
And I think you have a lot to do with that, Dr. Madu, because just like Governor Fayemi mentioned, NITCOM, through Honorable Dabiri, is actually doing a lot. And all these suggestions, that are being put forward, you can actually, I know that you are constantly in touch with her. You should be able to put them together, discuss with her, and say that, okay, these are the kinds of suggestions that have come forward, and this is what we can do, and I'm sure she is going to be more than happy, to take it up from there. Because today, one of the major sources of foreign exchange for the CBN is the diaspora.
Oh, yes. More than crude oil.
More than crude oil now.
Yeah. Because the diaspora is constantly sending money. And so if they can do that with the central bank and make all this money, why can't they do on the investment? Rather than somebody from Houston sending money to another person from Woody to build a house for him.
Yeah, exactly.
And at the end of the day, the house is never built, and then the money is gone.
It's occupied by rats and lizards.
And then those are the kinds of problems. So we can actually make investment in all those areas. And the diaspora, this morning, by the way, just for your information, my very first meeting organized by Professor Pat is to understand that I meet with the diaspora community. So I met with them this morning. Maybe you are not in Washington, D.C., so I didn't have the opportunity to meet with you, but I met with them. And then yesterday, I also met with the African American community. And this morning as well, I also met with what they call the Minority Business Development Association. That one is not just African Americans, it are also some Nigerians, and in addition to Nigerians is also some Koreans. That's when I got my invitation actually to Korea, that they want me to come in and discuss more about the minerals that they found that in Nasarawa state, that they have been looking for me to have the opportunity to do that. So there are lots of opportunities, and I'm happy that you actually join in and you are doing that. So you are the biggest gainer for this event today. So you can take all this information back to the NITCOM and discuss with the DG, Dabiri, and then be able to tell us what next. Thank you very much.
Okay, and I think we'll have another question from Elder Muyiwa Alu. I think you're muted.
Alu.
Aliu.
No, Alu.
No, Alu. There's no why. Unless IU.
We can't hear you.
We can't hear him.
Elder, we can't hear you, sir.
Okay. Maybe while we take care of the sound issue, I'll go ahead and ask another question. So given the recent economic challenges and rising inflation rates in Nigeria, do you believe the government's fiscal policies are effectively addressing the needs of the people, or are they benefiting more of the elites?
Well, you have asked that question differently earlier on, and I'm happy that Dr. Fayemi answered it, to say that the people, it wasn't you actually, the MD, or the GM who asked the question that the people are complaining and they are believing that our fiscal policies are not important and they are the only ones making the sacrifices. I think that's the way he put it, and I'm sure he addressed it properly, when Dr. Fayemi addressed it on that issue, that sometimes it's not exactly what the people feel is what has to be done that has to be done. So yes, there are so many things in the country that are being addressed. You know, when people tell you the good old days, talking of 1960s, 1940s, and the rest of that, people are really avoiding realities, you know. Because in these 1960s, 1940s that you don't have the development that you have today. You know, people were not making the kind of money we're making today. People were not driving the kind of cars that we have today. People are not building the kind of houses that are being built in Nigeria today. You know, so yes, there are some good old days, but there were also challenges with the good old days. And there are the days today, and there are also the advantages and the good things happening today. You know, so what I noticed and what I learned about governance is that you can never, ever satisfy everybody. You know, so whatever you do, you know, some other people are going to come on the social media and say, no, we don't want it. You know, that's not what we want. Oh, this is what we want. And that's why I gave you the example of if we have 3 billion naira as an income and we have to spend it, somebody will say, no, pay workers the money. Somebody will say, no, construct this road. Somebody will say, no, construct this hospital for us. Depending on their needs, you know, because people are going to come out with different things. And I'm happy, really. I got excited when Dr. Fayemi also definitely having the same kind of problem. He said he has 3 million people and 3 million ways of governing the state, you know, because everybody is going to tell you, this is the way I do it. And those who have never been elected, never ever participated in election, never been a leader in any kind of thing, they know how to run the government more than you, you know, because they will tell you, this is the way they do it. You say, how do you know? Because you have never been in it. You know, so, and I think that's the advantage of freedom. That's what democracy is all about. You know, so you take from everybody and then you put it together and you come out with what you think is the best thing. So if you talk to the president today, the president will tell you, yes, the decisions that I'm taking for Nigeria, I strongly believe they are the best decisions for Nigeria. The policies that we have today are the best policies for Nigeria. Because that's his conviction, you know, and that's the reason why he's taking those decisions based on what he has seen or what he has learned or the future that he is in, you know. And I think that's probably the answer that I can give you.